Korea is often called the Forgotten War, mostly because American generals want it forgotten. In late 1950, the Chinese army intervened and routed the U.S. Army. Most blame falls upon the overall commander, General Douglas MacArthur. He was certain that American air power could destroy Chinese armies. However, the Chinese had years of experience fighting the Japanese and developed tactics to evade aerial attacks. As a result, American units were outmaneuvered and defeated in several large battles by Chinese forces of similar size. To avoid aerial attacks, the Chinese marched at night and hid during the day with camouflage. The harsh winter weather limited aerial observation and was a shock to American soldiers who had fought in the tropics during World War II. The Chinese did not rely on fleets of trucks for logistical support, but horses and manpower that needed no roads. Chinese infantry had only light weapons and were often expected to scavenge for food. Nearly all their weapons were American-made, captured from the defeated Chinese nationalist forces. As American forces retreated, they left behind ammunition and food the Chinese needed. When the Americans attacked up roads, the Chinese put up little resistance and moved into nearby hills. This strategy was based on the wisdom of ancient Chinese warrior Sun Tzu, who wrote, quote, "In ground which offers no advantage to either side, we should lure the enemy by a feigned departure, wait until half his force has come out, and make an intercepting attack." End quote. This tactic was used as MacArthur demanded that his units advance quickly to the Chinese border and told the press the war would be won by Thanksgiving. The first major encounter occurred on October 25, 1950, when Chinese infantry divisions attacked and destroyed a South Korean division, and after 4 days of fighting, caused another division to retreat. The U.S. Army's famous 1st Cavalry Division with lots of tanks was sent to the rescue. After 3 days of heavy fighting, that became known as the Battle of Unsun, it retreated with heavy losses. MacArthur was arrogant and refused to listen to those who suggested caution. He modified his victory timeline and launched a home-by-Christmas offensive. Units were ordered to press onward on roads as Chinese units marched through the hills and attacked their flanks. Links to the official history tell the details of each battle, but keep in mind that official Army history is mostly positive.
On 20 November, United Nations forces are advancing everywhere in North Korea and have reached the Manchurian border at Haisan-jin, as Chinese Reds, who entered the fighting 3 weeks previously, have suddenly withdrawn. On 24 November, General Douglas MacArthur launches a major assault in the western sector in a movement designed to end the war in Korea, barring full-scale intervention by the Chinese Communists. By 28 November, the Chinese Communists have again entered the fighting in far greater force than they did a month previously. This halts the UN general assault and drives UN troops back, especially on the right flank of the western line, where South Korean resistance is crumbling. By 4 December, Chinese Communists have driven a wedge between the U.S. 8th Army in the west and the 10th Corps in the east, with the 8th Army retreating toward Pyongyang and part of the 10th Corps fighting its way out of a trap near the Changjin Reservoir. By 20 December, Chinese Communists and regrouped North Koreans have driven UN forces to the 38th parallel in the west. In the east, U.S. Marines and 7th Division troops have fought their way out of the Red Trap and are being evacuated by ship at Hungnam, with other UN troops fighting bitterly to hold the perimeter until the evacuation is completed.
The U.S. Army was routed and began a disorganized retreat that left thousands of Marines and soldiers surrounded near the Chosin Reservoir. They had to fight their way out as entire American regiments were destroyed and thousands taken prisoner. Survivors made it to an enclave around the Hungman port, where the U.S. Army's 10th Corps with 20,000 soldiers and Marines were trapped. Tons of supplies and ammunition were blown up and the rest abandoned, to include 16 tanks on rail cars, as the Americans fled by ship.
At Hungnam, preparations are underway for the largest amphibious evacuation in military history. Everything of military value in the cities of Ham Hung and Hungnam is to be carried away or destroyed. Huge shipments of military equipment had poured into the area for weeks to supply the expected victory march to the Manchurian border. Now these supplies, sent here to support the whole 10th Corps, are piled up and carried out to the transports again. Headquarters equipment, rehabilitation supplies, everything goes as Korean civilians pitch in to help. Most of the Korean population is hoping there will be shipping space for them to go too. The vast quantity of equipment that is being moved here is more easily comprehended when you think of the units involved. The 10th Corps that is being evacuated includes 3 full U.S. divisions: the 1st Marine Division, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the 7th Infantry Division, plus thousands of South Korean troops. The personnel involved in this move is equal to the entire population of Dayton, Ohio.
The rest of the U.S. Army retreated back across the 38th parallel and kept going. There was political discussion if all of Korea should be abandoned. The Chinese could not keep up their offensive as they had outrun their supply base. American generals managed to form a strong defensive line that the Chinese could not outflank. A myth was created to excuse this disaster that claimed Chinese hordes conducted human wave attacks against greatly outnumbered Americans, but their armies were the same size. General MacArthur blamed political limitations for his defeat that did not allow bombing of targets inside China, although that would have made little difference. The problem was that MacArthur had insisted units dash to the Chinese border because he wanted China to intervene. See the short video link below. He greatly underestimated the capabilities of the lightly equipped Chinese army and refused to listen to his frontline officers. MacArthur never spent a night in Korea and only flew in from Japan for occasional visits with generals. This incompetence led to his relief by President Harry Truman in April 1951. This massive retreat by the U.S. Army in Korea was the second worst defeat in American military history in the 20th century. The Americans had air and naval superiority, heavy tanks, and massive artillery firepower, but Chinese units were far more maneuverable in hilly terrain. The Army's worst defeat was MacArthur's disastrous defense of the Philippines in 1942. See the video link below. Official history is kind to General MacArthur and the U.S. military because these disastrous defeats were forgotten.